Hey there, gang. I hope everyone's well. I am not. So much so that I couldn't record live narration, and I'm instead doing it all through voiceover this week. But it's going to be an uncomfortable voiceover with a lot of vocal fry and impacted sinus sounds. Anyway, we have here a 1980 Martin D35. It's in pretty amazing shape, all things considered. There's not very much playwear. The D35 is an interesting model. It was introduced in 1965, and its most obvious feature is a three-piece back. Martin has made instruments, of course, with two-pieced book-matched backs as standard since forever. The thing is, by the 1960s, the Brazilian rosewood supply started to dry up, and coming up with clean 8-inch wide boards to slice into back sets was getting harder and harder, and this seemed like an efficient use of material for Martin. Does the three-piece back change the sound? Oh, probably. But a side-by-side comparison isn't really possible, though, because Martin also changed the brace dimensions for this model at the same time. They are about 20% narrower than a comparable D28 from the same era, which was the only other rosewood dreadnought available in the line in the 1960s. Martin had done away with the pearl heavy models, the 42s and Style 45, when the Second World War came along. So now you had the choice between the 28 and 35, and not a whole lot of difference between them, really. 1980 is also an interesting time as Martin was trying to work its way back to manufacturing excellence, because the 70s had been kind of rough. We've discussed issues like the misplaced bridges and how there was a perception that they'd gotten away from what made their designs great and had maybe been coasting a bit on reputation. In 1977, they'd come out with the first HD 28s, which is a conscious return to their golden era, both stylistically. The herringbone purfling that is the feature of those guitars had not been a thing for like 30 years at that point. But they'd also started to scallop their braces again, which gives us a much more responsive guitar. Playing with mass and stiffness is what bracing's all about. Here's something I've noticed in Martins of this era with the bound fretboard. For some reason, they seem to forego spraying lacquer on the area of the fretboard extension. And I've never really been able to explain this because even when brand new, there is a discernible difference in color between lacquered and unlacquered surfaces, and it only gets more pronounced with age. The Martin pickguard crack is in evidence, and this is normal. Virtually all of them had it, and it's a condition that stems from Martin's assembly method of gluing their nice large pickguards directly to the spruce soundboard. This constrains the wood and keeps it from moving seasonally with the rest of the board, until at some point it pops open on a grain line or two. This is not usually disastrous. This area is pretty well supported underneath by the X-brace and a soundboard reinforcement. Still, it's good to get it glued back up. The black plastic guards from the 70s are the most prone to movement. In some cases, we need to remove and replace the whole guard. But here we've got one that is nicely adhered and it hasn't shrunk too much. I think we will be safe in just freeing an inch or so along the line of the crack. That'll give the wood some room to move as we glue it back together. In some other cases, the pickguard will have shrunk enough to seriously distort the top of the guitar, and then we definitely do need to remove it because we'd probably never get the cracks to close. The action on this instrument is pretty darn good for a 45-year-old Martin. It's about 7/64 on the bass, 5 on the treble. But there's plenty of saddle height. I don't believe it's ever been lowered, as there is a full 1/8 of an inch or 3.2 millimeters protruding. There do seem to be the after effects of some severe dryness, though. The ends of the frets are all sticking up and quite sharp. There's a gap between them and the binding. There's also a big crack that runs between the bridge pin holes and into the treble side wing. This can happen when the bridge shrinks from dryness and each bridge pin then becomes a miniature splitting wedge. I'll begin by scooping some fine ebony dust into the cracks. This is made by sanding ebony with 320 grit abrasive paper. The finer the better. I'll saturate the dust with thin cyanoacrylate glue. This usually takes several applications of dust and glue to build up proud of the surface. While the fill cures, I'll start work on the crack. There's a line of lacquer over the pickguard, which I'll need to score with a scalpel. Then I'll use a thin palette knife to free up a line about an inch wide along the length of the crack. The pickguard is eventually going to be stuck back down using Titebond wood glue. The slightly flexible nature of Titebond helps in this case, but it does rely on some scratches in the plastic to grab onto, so I'll use some 220 grit sandpaper flossed through here to put those in. I prefer a protein-based glue, hide glue or fish glue, for the actual crack. These tend to draw the two halves of the crack together more tightly as they cure. Here I'm using my suction cup to force the glue through. Here's a clamp for the waist. This will draw things together. This crack aligns pretty well, so I just need some light clamping. And here's another clamp for the wider portion of the bouts. Once the crack is glued, I'll re-adhere the pickguard. Squeeze in some glue. I've got a flat caul that fits between the braces on the inside and this shaped one that goes on the outside. Hydrosaurus Rex has been working out just fine in his new position. Pretty happy with that. Glued up really cleanly. I'll return my attention to the bridge cracks. I'll use some flat sanding blocks and a razor blade scraper. I'll buff the surface using micro mesh pads up to 8,000 grit. Ebony's really nice for this kind of thing because it takes on a polish that looks like it's been finished even without any oil. I will add a coat of oil after I'm done. The chamfer around the top of some of the holes is left a bit misshapen. I'll re-establish it with a countersink bit. A quick wipe with some Danish oil. I'll let that sit on the surface for a minute or two and then wipe off all the excess. The fret ends have been elevated for what seems like a long time, and there's a bunch of grunge under there. I'll do my best to clean those out. It's a tasty little spice blend of corrosion and skin cells. I've set up my fret press. People frequently ask me where I got this. It's from guitarbuilderonline.com. Not a sponsor. Mine is an older model. They've improved it since. But I'm using a tighter radius caul, 10 inches, which will really press the ends down firmly. Even with the cleaning, you can see just how much gorgonzola emerged. I'll round over the fret ends. Frets in the first position had some light divots, and in cases like that, I often find that recrowning with the triangular file can reduce those significantly, or eliminate them, even without having to reduce the fret height across the entire board. And then, of course, we must polish. There's a big light-colored divot on the headstock, which offends mine eye. Let us blot it out. I want to reduce the action on this guitar by 1/64 of an inch, which is about 0.4 millimeters, so I have to remove twice that amount from the bottom of the saddle, i.e. 1/32 of an inch, or 0.8 millimeters. Sandpaper, flat surface, and this thick steel rule helps to maintain a right angle relationship between the base and the sides. It's best to sneak up on the fit. And there we have it. Action is now 6/64 on the bass, 4 on the treble, which is great. That would be 2.4 millimeters and 1.6. And there's still a healthy saddle exposure of 3/32 of an inch. Again, 2.4 millimeters. That gives sufficient break angle for the strings and maintains the sonic qualities we expect from a dreadnought. Getting very much lower than that brings us into neck reset territory. But this is a wonderful D35 with a lot of years left in it before we get there. So sometimes we get lucky.